Was written even in the 3rd, 4th centuries. Surprising maybe to you to hear that there are not only 4 Gospels that were ever written.
No, there are more.
There are many more Gospels. I know about 43 Gospels. If I'm not mistaken by the number now, over 40 Gospels. Gospel of the Ebionites, Gospel of the Nazarenes, Gospel of the Egyptians, Gospel of St. Thomas. Many Gospels which has not made itself into the New Testament. But people wrote about these Gospels. What are they? What Jesus did, what he said, how he acted, what he preached, and so on. So when we examine the New Testament believed by the Christians with the 4 Gospels, what do we find? We find Jesus Christ is saying things here and there. So we have to examine this because a lot of people have written about them. Are they writing this in truth, without any exaggerations, without any things that have been added in to make it fantastical? For example, one of the Gospels, called Gospel of Matthew, I want to share this because it's very important to know why we have to approach in this way. Before that, let me give an example. Suppose now a dinosaur, Tyrannosaurus Rex. Do you know dinosaurs? Yeah. Came up from the ground there, from that park, from the ground, and roaring, it just, walked around this, and in this process, many of the people got stampeded and under his feet, died. And guess what? Even though with all these cameras around, no one reported this event. Not a single person, you and me, went to our homes because we survived that incident and told our friends in our Facebook, Twitter, whatever it might be, social media that you use. None of us reported this event. Only one person, this gentleman, for example. Now, would you consider that story believable? You would say there's something fishy going around. Such an event of this magnitude, a dinosaur going around in 21st century, you would say everyone's going to report it. Many people. Now, compare this to one of the New Testament writing. It describes how during the so-called alleged crucifixion of Jesus, the graves were opened up of many saints. And the dead saints came over the ground, and this is in the Gospel of Matthew, and they appeared to many people, multitudes. Now, such an event of this magnitude, if you were there, saints, right? It could be someone's brother, someone's uncle, someone's dad, someone's grandfather.
Yeah, but that's a parable, though.
Yeah.
That's a parable.
So
Jesus said, give it in parables.
So listen, what I'm saying is, that description, that historical or so-called event is only narrated by one writer called Matthew. We don't even know his second name. None of the other people, none of the other gospel writers who are believed to be, authentically transmitting the gospel, the other 3, none of the Jewish authors, historians, or the Romans authors, historians, no people narrated this. Only one individual. You would say, as you said already, it's very unlikely to be true because such an event to be narrated. So now if you question this writing in the New Testament, if an event like this is narrated by this individual, how much is he actually inventing? Because it looks like some kind of concoction to make something wonderful.
That could be the same.
It's the moral of the story.
Yeah, but is it true though? Is it true? Is it true? You can speak to my friend over there. Do you want to take him to our side?
No, I'm going to give you getting involved.
The reason why he wants to interrupt this discussion is because let's carry on because we can have a
getting involved. Exactly, great.
Okay. So
no, don't worry. I'm going to help you out.
Right.
It works both ways.
So as you realize, we have a text called the New Testament, and within this we have writings. An author is writing something which you think is fishy, because it doesn't sound to be historical, because if it was true, you would expect a lot of people narrating this magnificent, huge event of this magnitude. What else do we know about him? For example, at the very beginning, this gentleman, this writer, describes the genealogy of Jesus Christ, and he gives the list. And I'll tell you why this is very important, because we can now assess the character of this individual and to see whether his writing is worthy to be believed in or not. He says, these are the generations from Abraham to David, from David to the exile to the Babylon, and then to Jesus. 3 lots of 14 generations. He says, these are all the generations 14, 14, and 14. Guess what? We know this is totally incorrect. How do we know this? Because he is describing people of the Old Testament. And when we go to the Old Testament, like in the books of Chronicles, chapter 3, verse 10 onwards and so on, we find the same individuals there narrated, father to son to grandson and so on. And we discover he's omitting certain people. Now, you might think he's omitted to make a fantastic number, to make a 14 as a magical number. But guess what? The people he omits, like he omits a person called Jehoiakim, an individual called Jehoiakim. What's so special about him? Actually, he's a key figure because this author, Matthew, he makes Jesus Christ the descendant of David, right? He wants Jesus to be sitting on the throne of David. So he gives the line of David through his progeny. Within this line, Jehoiakim is one individual God cursed, and God said, you and your descendants are all cursed. You shall have none to sit on the throne of David. So if Jehoiakim was there within this line, within this genealogy, then you cannot claim to sit on the throne of David. So he takes that name away. So he takes that name away. Do you follow? He takes that name away so that he's trying to fit Jesus on this line. But we know the dishonesty. That he is twisting history. He is changing history for his theological motive. So I've given you 2 examples. I can carry on and on. 2 examples to show that these writings cannot be believed on. We cannot believe. Because how can we trust the author when their character is in question?
You're saying that the generations from the Old Testament were rewritten again in the New Testament.
That's a claim.
Yes.
But trying to say that it only happened in the New Testament and never happened in the Old Testament.
He changed the genealogy to fit his theories. And because he changed what is already there, he can't change the historical writings. The writings in Chronicles are still available. And when we check the writings, we can see which name he has removed. And we know the name he has removed is very significant. Because if that name was there, in Matthew's genealogy, Jesus cannot be the son of David.
That's a period of 42 years or not? No. 14, 14 and 14.
No,
there are
Jesus to
3 sets of 14.
to Adam is
Within-
6,000 years.
Yeah,
Within-
According to the Bible.
He's talking about
Can you
14
name
No, he doesn't know what he's talking
every
about.
single person
He doesn't know what he's talking about.
from
The
Jesus?
14 generations.
Can you name
Just
Jesus
get
to
me a
Adam?
Bible, I will show
can't
you in the
name
Bible.
You could never name.
Could someone get me a physical
people
Bible?
over
How many
6,000 years.
years in each generation?
6,000 years we named over.
From this,
How many years in each generation?
6,000 years.
no, it's between father and son. Father and son. So we're talking about what?
How many years?
No. When we say
6,000 years.
this generation,
According to the Bible.
it's not like more than 100 years, is it? Right? So 14
generations.
generations.
Then was what, 50 years? 60
Could be.
years?
Can I? Thank you. I'll show you. There you go. Here's the Bible. Very
In
interesting.
Matthew it says, Jesus begat
Let me
all
show
the
you.
way to
The Old
Adam.
Testament and the New Testament.
Here it is.
He
Now-
says he begat all the way to Adam. Yes?
No, you're mistaken. I'll
Right,
show you.
all the way to Adam.
Since you don't know what you're talking about,
Right?
let me
All the
continue.
way to Adam. And after that, I want to ask him, how did Islam begin? That's a question I want to ask you.
Let him finish this
Please.
topic.
This is a record. This is the Holy Bible, right?
Just jumping from one.
Book of Matthew. This is the first book of the New Testament. The record of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. So Abraham was the father of Isaac. Isaac is the father of Jacob. So now you're talking about the father and son business, right? All the way goes on. And it talks about here. Thus there were 14 generations in all. From Abraham to David. So from Abraham to David, there were not 15 generations. Matthew says 14. And from 14 from David to the exile to Babylon, and 14 from the exile to the Christ. 3 lists of 14s. Matthew makes it no more than 14 in all. But we know this is false historically, because when we go in the genealogies here in the Old Testament, in 1 Chronicles, if you have time, maybe you can bring up 1 Chronicles 3:16 and we read side by side. And we will discover the names that he has changed them. The names are here, all the names. He changes the name, not just one, many. So this is example number 2. The example number 3 is even very nearby. He invents a prophecy. He says, and Jesus Christ, who was prophesied in the past that he shall be called a Nazarene. You can read the whole Old Testament from cover to cover, from beginning to end. You will never find this prophecy in the Old Testament that he was prophesied by the prophets that the Messiah will be called a Nazarene.
No.
Doesn't exist.
Listen,
So what Matthew is doing, he's inventing, he's fabricating, he's distorting, he's concocting.
I'm dealing with this.
So when you read today, in 2,000 years afterwards,
One at a time.
which is going to supposedly guide you to the truth,
You can ask
and
me
you
the
realize this author is doing all of these things, you will say, this doesn't seem to be an author who is a man of integrity. I cannot trust his writings. I cannot trust his writings. You can examine all the books likewise, right? Yeah. So this is what we're saying is, what we believe as Muslims, this book narrates about stories of the prophets, and it adds and takes away and distorts, and it, does all these embellishments. There are some truth, but there are also falsehood. And the Quran says the Quran came as a muhaiminan, as a criterion to witness and testify the truth and falsify the falsehood. The Quran came as a guardian and say, look, all people of the scripture, come, let us reason together. As I said earlier, let us come to a common ground, that we worship none but God, and we do not take partners besides God along with him, and we do not say God is Jesus, or in fact the Quran says certainly they disbelieve who say God is a Trinity. Desist, it is better for you, for your God is one. And it talks about how Jesus, in fact, you'd be surprised to know in the Quran there's a chapter called Mary, by name of the mother of Jesus, in the Quran, and it describes how Jesus is born. When Mary was pregnant and she brought the baby to the people, how do you think she defended herself? Can you imagine? Do you know what she said in the Quran? فَأَشَارَتْ إِلَيْهِ. She just pointed to the baby, and the people said, how can we speak to someone who is in the cradle? How can we speak to a baby? The baby Jesus spoke. And he says, I am a slave of God. God made me a prophet and blessed me and made me not so unrighteous to my mother, and so on. Because the baby Jesus spoke, they knew that Mary was a chaste woman.
12. That happened when he was 12.
In the Quran.
When he was 12 years of age,
Yeah.
he was taken, and they witnessed him.
But the Quranic story,
When he was a baby, he was 12.
yeah. But the Quranic story, it gives you but the Quran gives you the story that happened in reality. That's how Jesus, as a baby, and his mother was removed from these accusations of improper conduct, being unchaste. If that miracle didn't happen, how do you think Mary would have been removed from this accusation? By just saying, God gave me a child? Who would have believed like this, like that? If you now come to...
It stated that Jesus was 12 years of age when he said that he was a slave or messenger.
We have to be very wary of what we read now. As you realize, whatever we read in the Bible, we have to think twice.
I don't know what chapter it is, but it's
Yeah.
in the same.
Yeah. So we have to think twice what we read.
It's the same.
In the Quran,
Ask him how it started.
in the
That's what I'm
Quran,
waiting for.
I need a Quran, please.
Yeah, please, get the
In the
Quran. How did it start?
Quran, God says, look,
How did it start?
this is a book in which there's guidance for sure,
it didn't say that.
without a doubt.
Can you show me how
A
it started?
guidance for those who are God-fearing,
Quran start?
righteous. This is exactly what we expect from a book. Yeah. So when the Quran describes to,
No one here with a
it
Quran.
speaks to you, to your heart and your mind, and
It doesn't speak to anybody. Can we have ask him for the beginnings of the Quran?
look,
Let's ask the beginning. How did it start?
He'll get to it. Let him finish one topic.
this book,
This is just preaching, isn't it?
no, this book has no doubt in it a guidance for the God-fearing.
There's no proof it came from Allah, this book.
Right.
No proof whatsoever.
Now let's discuss this.
There's no proof.
No,
He doesn't believe in
There's no
Christianity.
proof this book came
interesting-
from Allah.
He's an atheist.
Interesting.
I would like you to address this gentleman.
There's no proof it came from Allah.
We have spoken with him
It didn't come
before.
from Allah. Let's break that down.
He believes in things. He doesn't believe in any of the scriptures. So that's why this discussion
in the truth.
is not like
I believe in the
meaningful here.
believe in screenshots.
He doesn't believe.
That
In fact,
debunk you every single week.
we have spoken,
So
and he knows that very well. So what I would like you to, because you said logic. The moment you said logic, I knew you are a person who thinks and reasons and who wants to not just believe because you are born into a family, but you would understand and try to weigh the evidence.
to you.
So when we examine, for example, the life of the Prophet ﷺ, for 40 years in his life, do you know what people told, what they said about this man? Muhammad, peace be upon him.
We don't know.
For 40 years.
It's hearsay. We don't know.
It's not an exact.
For 40 years before he received any
He
revelation,
didn't receive any revelation.
they called him as-Sadiqul Amin,
It did no
the
revelation.
truthful one,
No,
the
I'm going by your
trustworthy
book.
one.
I'm going
He
by
was known,
no revelation.
established in his community to be a truthful person and a trustworthy person.
No revelation.
They did not ever even hear
No revelation.
any lies from him,
This Gabriel here.
only mistrust from him. So this was a man for 40 years like
All
this,
hearsay.
right? So when he received revelation,
Always present this.
Yes, and that's why
he didn't realize
that's why the
that.
bad greed.
He's saying it's
That's why the
Yeah, of course, I was going to be a prophet. I knew it all along.
What happens to Superman?
He was like trembling. What happened to him? He was trembling like this, right?
Not when
He came to his wife, said, "Wrap me up, cover me up, cover me up."
He can't fly no more.
What has happened to him? She described, and he described.
Let's get back into this.
You know what has happened? He didn't know what was happening to him. So it's not like an imposter saying, "Oh yeah, yep, God has made me a prophet."
A story that begins
This is how
upon
it
a
is.
time.
So
They lived their man.
he is not someone that is making things up. So when
Pure preaching. Listen, I don't mean to mess up your camera time, but this is pure preaching.
So when he went to his people, like at the time there was a custom. If there was an urgent emergency of some kind,
Once upon
they will go in top of the mountain and give a call like Ya Sawaha, for example.
says who?
People will leave and abandon everything and they'll run to this place like
And you was there.
just like even 300 years ago in this country
And
and,
you was
others, people used to ring ding 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 the bell like, and people will leave everything and join them because that's how the whole community will come to help. So he did this, Ya Sawaha. People came running and he says, "Look, what if I tell you that there is an army waiting behind the mountains to attack you? Would you believe me?" Do you know what the people said? He says, "We would believe you because we have never heard any lies from you." The people testified about him, and they says, "Look, I'm asking you, I'm telling you that worship God alone, that there is only one God worthy of worship. You should worship none else. Abundance and
which
shun
God?
and reject
But which
the
God?
false gods,
Yeah, but
the
which
gods,
God? Which
false
God?
gods."
Yeah, but
Yep.
which one? Allah.
So this was
We've
his
got
call.
Yahweh,
This was his call.
Rima.
We only have one.
So
got so many
when we
gods. Which
examine
God are
the
we
life,
worshipping?
You believe in
is
One. Which one
see,
are we worshipping here?
he was inviting
Yes, which one?
people
Yeah, but which are the ones
to worship one God, not to worship deities that they made with their own hands, they carve with their own hands.
Worship yourself. Honor and love yourself.
Worship the moon, the sun, the stars, the stone.
Yes, because that's the only proof you have, it's yourself. This invisible God you're talking about, there's no proof for it.
Had access to the same as we find in
The source.
Earth.
No,
We
but
had
your
different
source,
materials
starts
than
with
Africa.
other sources.
They
Africa
have
got your
access to
source.
things we don't have.
Right, now my
So
source
therefore,
states,
what's
okay,
around
no,
them
not tomato
is
sauce.
a different-
And what is that? We can bring in jokes if you want, because your story is a joke.
Yeah. So
I'm
what?
saying your story does not begin. I'm not. Look at my face. You know I never.
Interestingly though, when the Prophet, when the Quran asked them,
You distracted me from this.
who created all of this? They said God, Allah. They believe, but what did the Arab society at that time?
Country and they say this is what we call it.
Yes.
We say to people,
Exactly.
"Look,
But what-
It's
No,
subjective.
what we are saying is this: how God is correcting
This is
us
all
in our mistake is this.
subjective.
God is saying, look, when people are asked
all
who created
subjective,
this, and you
guys.
say God,
I keep
then
believing
God is
Harry
saying,
Potter.
then why do you set up partners
what's
with
going on
him?
in Harry Potter?
Why do you worship an elephant with him alongside
I
as
keep
well?
believing Harry Potter. What's
Reject
wrong with you guys?
setting up partners and
The
worship
answer
God
is
alone.
yourself. That's the only
So
proof you have.
even in different
Right?
places
No,
and
there's
different
different
countries,
there's no proof
We had different
that
animals.
any
So,
God
do you know what the
created.
Quran
That
says?
God created. You know what the word created means? What's the word
Yes,
created
yes.
means?
Kangaroos in
What's it
would we worship a
A
kangaroo?
person or thing that
Should we
brings
worship a
We
kangaroo?
have a kangaroo in Australia.
Yeah.
So is
I can't
Allah
say to
a
him-
personal thing?
I'm more
You're
like-
using the definition I'm giving you.
Should we worship a kangaroo? Say we were in Australia.
Show me where it says that.
Right.
Show me in the Quran where it
Right.
says.
So you and I will realize
Show me now.
if we used our intellect,
Show me where it says.
our logic, our rationality, we would not want to, we shouldn't worship anything of the creation, because
Does he say that
everything
he's
of the
the creator?
creation is
Does Allah
limited,
say that he's
finite,
the creator?
dependent. All of these are creation,
no?
not worthy of worship.
Yes or no?
The